And now for something completely different. Ta-da! This is going to be different in a lot of ways, but we are so thankful to be here. I am Dr. Laura Levens, and this is my colleague, Dr. John Inscore Essick. We're going to be doing this lecture right now sort of in tandem in tag team, because we did the research together, sort of tag team style. So you'll see us move back and forth in this presentation. So a little bit about who we are. Here's some enormous pictures of who we are. So Reverend Dr. John Inscore Essick, here he is. He is currently a pastor, one of the co-pastors of Port Royal Baptist Church. He pastors there with his wife, Reverend Amber Inscore Essick. They're on another side, but that's sort of how we were able to begin this research in Henry County, because he lives there and is a resident there. And not only does he live there, my goodness, he writes op-eds in their local newspaper and book reviews and heads up some of the initiatives of the Historical Society. He also has a running club at the local elementary school, so as well as like various ministry groups thinking about addictions and other sorts of issues going on in the county. He was educated at Baylor University and is one of our professors. We are from Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. We're a seminary that's only 20 years old. Woo! We have an alum back there. Represent. Yeah. I'll say a little bit more about our school. We're not across the street. We're not across Lexington Road. You can come find us in West Louisville at Simmons College, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm Dr. Laura Levens. I grew up in Louisville. I can tell you where I went to middle school and high school because I'm a Louisville native and will never forget. I currently reside in Lexington. My doctorate is from Duke University down in Durham, so did a lot of training down there. I am a Baptist female pastor and ordained. When I have taught like adult education in seminaries and other places, people coming from rural areas, sometimes those people think that I'm about as real as a unicorn, but here I am, and I stand. I am ordained. St. Matthew's Baptist Church is my ordaining congregation. They are just down the road from this place, and they're wonderful people. My parents still go there. So, and then our third person who's not here today, this is Mr. Jordan Conley. He is a Knott County, Eastern Kentucky native, hails from very rural Appalachia areas, currently lives in Louisville, Kentucky. He works for a funeral home here in town and is also a student with us at Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. And he was taking a course on rural places and theology, and so he came and did interview work with us. He was at 2 of our locations. So why are we here? Well, first and foremost, we are here because Angela lovingly invited us to be here, and we are very grateful to the Black Church Studies group and the Consultation community for inviting us and welcoming us into the fold. It's been lovely to make so many new friends and learn together. But, also we had to ask ourselves, why are we here? It's always good to take a step back and realize your own urges, desires, needs. What is your affinity to doing a certain type of work? So these are not all of the reasons why we're here, but these are just some that have sort of come into play, I think, so that we can be aware of what we're doing as we do our research. One, we have various commitments to rural Kentucky in a lot of different parts of Kentucky. So we all know that rural communities are vast and varied and different. They each have their own distinctives, and they also share some common threads, and we just are very committed to them as the places. We love history research and retrieval especially. We are both trained historians. We just love a good archive. I mean, we spend all day there. It's so fun. But one of the types of research that we do is we actually look at a lot of retrieval of stories and histories that have been lost. which means we do a lot of work, not maybe the 30,000 feet or even the 100-foot view. I mean, we are on the ground crawling through the grass, what did we miss? What did we miss? What can we do? So we're just those type of people. We love doing it. Also glad you're here. We desire to learn from Black church people and traditions. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that with the last one, but I do think that I want you to hear us very loudly say that this project was undertaken with interest in learning from the persons we were interviewing. So we are trying very hard to honor them and also honor that need. And if we didn't want to learn from them, I'm not sure that we should be here this morning. So we can talk about that. We desire to serve the mission of this consultation to provide resourcing materials for rural congregations. We very much want congregations. We heard the call that rural congregations get resources that are meant for urban areas and that they need resources tailored to them and that understand them and their concerns. And so we are a part of that. And then we also do maintain commitments to repentance and racial justice in rural spaces. Our seminary, like I said, is about 20 years old, but it has been from that time. It was made with white seminary traditions. It still was a traditionally white seminary. Our location was in Georgetown, which is near Lexington. We were invited into the Black space of West Louisville about 4 years ago. And we're very cognizant that it was an invitation, that we are a white tradition seminary being invited and moving into Black space. And that has been important for us to sort of, again, learning opportunities, realizing that there are, we're really humbled by that invitation. Just that is a humble thing to be there and to try to serve West Louisville by getting to know West Louisville for sure and all of what that entails, as well as other things. And we do want to challenge the racism within ourselves, within our own tradition, by being there as one of the many things, and also join in the justice work with everyone as well. So just why we're here. So our goal was to study Henry County as a group. There's 4 African American churches in Henry County. We are not members or congregants or participants in any of them, so we realized it would be a big thing to be invited into these churches. But we wanted to sort of study Henry County as a whole, which sounds weird because I just told you we like to get in the grass and the weeds of things, but we also thought that just a general survey of the county would be a good lens, especially because these churches, as we got to know them, seem to be so connected with each other in several ways. So here just quickly our questions. What is the nature of Black religious life in the rural area of Henry County, Kentucky? We did not assume we already knew what that was. We wanted to go find out what that was. And then again, what is the nature of rural Black community life there? And then do the churches and communities crisscross with one another on a regular basis? And how does the interaction affect the nature of Black religious life? There kind of seems maybe in some ways that we've been taught or learned or taught about the Black church tradition that there's this church and community coming together where the church is the place for the community and the church is for the community and things like that. So we wanted to see what it was like in Henry County. What did it look like? So then we did an ethnographic portrait process, which means that John specifically, because he's from Henry County, called up some people and said, "Hi, I'm from Henry County. We have this research project. We'd like very much if we could come and worship with you and then have some very quick interviews with the congregants." So we were able to successfully meet with 3 of the 4 church pastors. Also, a lot of our ability to do that, we give thanks for a certain community leader of Henry County. His name is Joe Wright. You'll see him in a bit. He helped us. He was our helper, and he saw our project. He saw that it would be good. He too loved history, understood its importance. and helped us get connected and helped our vision for this project be heard. We visited Sunday worship. We set a certain time. The church knew we were coming. And we, as researchers, there's just 3 of us, or 2 on the last time we came for Sunday worship, and worshiped the whole worship hour with them. We coordinated meals for them. We would offer to bring them food. John cooks a mean local sweet potato, and there's fried chicken place, there's a gas station in Henry County that makes just better fried chicken than anything you've ever had. I mean, I don't actually know that. Like, you've had all the fried chicken that you have had, and I have not. But it was very good. And some churches wanted that, some churches did not, but we sort of coordinated how to help them be there for us so that we could conduct these short interviews. And then the participants, they sat for their individual portraits. And those are the pictures that you see on the wall. We successfully conducted about 35 interviews. And there are their portraits. All of those persons they said, yes, I agree to be photographed. And then we said, hey, you can have these portraits as a token of our appreciation. So our plan is to give them back, like copies, or give them back to them in some process. So that's a quick snapshot of how our research worked. So I'm going to turn it over to John now.
Thank you again for allowing us to be with you for this conference. Take a couple of minutes here and introduce you to Henry County just sort of demographically. First, finding it might be important. We've got a map here that Laura can pull up for you. You can see sort of where it is in the Indiana, Ohio, northern Kentucky area. If you zoom in a little bit more, you can see a little bit closer where it sits around Shelby County, Owen, Carroll, Trimble, Franklin, all our counties attaching to this. And then the third map, and then keep going, will show you in the county, the 3 stars show you where the churches were. And they're all along one sort of main road. And I'll mention that again in just a moment. Henry County is in proximity to several places that it considers to be major places. Shelbyville, LaGrange, Louisville, Cincinnati, and sometimes Frankfort. And so those would be the major population centers that people in my county would tend to think about if they have to go somewhere to get something, or to avoid, as it were. A few demographic elements here. The population currently is around 16,000 people. And black population in the county is probably just under 3%. It's well below the average in Kentucky, well below Christian County, and I think well below where it was 100 years ago. Even. The average age in the county is about 41. Around the time of the last census, the median income was about $42,000, $700, something like that. The poverty rate sits at just over 18%. The schools in the county schools are all on not just reduced lunch, but free lunch programs to address some of the stigma associated with that. Depending on the numbers and the time you look at, there are at least 200 businesses that have some number of employees in the county, and approximately 1,900 or so employees. So a few hundred businesses, 1,900 employees. We looked and looked and looked for black-owned businesses in the county, and they are almost impossibly hard to find. And we came across one that Joe did not even know about, and it's a guy on a corner with a store that is falling down, and he calls himself the Grill Master. And he literally has the grill on the main road in Eminence, and when you drive by, get into town, you can smell the Grill Master's food. And so, but, you know, not to be funny, that is the only black-owned business that we found in the county. And we asked everybody that we came in contact with. There are 40 plus churches in the county, and churches, are like weeds and plants. They come and go with the morning and the night, so as high as 55 down to 40. 4 of those are predominantly black congregations. 3 of them were founded as predominantly black congregations. One of them, and the 4th one is now. They are in Campbellsburg, 2 in Newcastle, and 1 in Eminence. Part of what we paid more attention to as a result of our planning process was to note in Henry County's history that it has a history of lynchings. And so depending on the count from the Courier-Journal and other places, you will find as many as 4 or 5 different lynchings in the county, with all of them before 1900. I really appreciate the pressure put on those in this consultation to pay attention to those numbers and to learn those stories. So there are efforts underway in Henry County, as much as the county is doing presently. Looks like this. In 2018, the Berry Center, which is fairly new and founded to further the work of President Wingleberry, organized a Get on the Bus tour in 2018. And they got a local resident, Joe Wright, to lead a bus tour. In 2018, they looked at places of significance for black people in Henry County. And we got on a school bus and drove around, and he showed us where schools were, where a school still is, where cemeteries were, where cemeteries have been abandoned. And for most of the white people on the bus and several of the black people, this was never heard any of these stories. We found out places in the county that you were not to go. Still in Henry County. Sundown parts of my own county. 2019, they did a second Get on the Bus tour. Joe Wright again did this, and this time we went looking for black-owned land, black-owned farms in a very farm-heavy county. I think on that long tour we found there was one place that was a black-owned farm. There's still one black-owned farm in the entire county. Now there were quite a few farms that featured very skilled black farmers, but they never owned them. They worked them, they ran them, and made them profitable, but they did not profit quite enough. So there are very few black farms. But farms featuring black farmers are much more common in the county. And then later this year, you'll see a theme here. Joe Wright will be leading us again, this time in Eminence. The Historical Society has organized a mapping black history in Eminence. And so what he's going to do is invite us to our new library, and there's going to be a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a map of Eminence on it with markers for significant black locations in Eminence that folks can then, after the meeting's over, go at their leisure and drive around and see where baptisms happened, where churches were founded, where businesses were that they couldn't get into either. And so there are efforts underway. More needs to be done, but these kind of collaborative efforts are generating conversation and relationships that are producing retrieval of stories or uncovering of stories that have been buried. So quickly now, a sketch of Campbellsburg Second Baptist, the first of 3 churches that we visited. Oh yeah, here's some pictures of some of the Get on the Bus tour folks and places that we went. The first church we visited was Campbellsburg Second Baptist Church. It was founded in 1848 they requested around 1848 release from Campbellsburg Baptist Church. This is well before the Civil War. Requested release and were granted release from the White Baptist Church that was only itself about 40 years old by this point. They immediately, as far as I can tell, bought the land that their church currently sits on before the Civil War, as the story goes. And we do have the record from the White Church of when the black members went and requested release from this church. In several of the interviews that we did with them, the line, the church on the side of the road. I mean, when you see the picture, the road is right there. Parking is quite limited. It came up quite a bit, but in many ways, they are, on the side of the road part makes them accessible. And it makes them accessible in a place, ironically, that we think of as not being accessible, a rural place, but they are accessible to people in need. They are pointed out in the community as, if you need help, go to the church on the side of the road. They are a stone's throw from the interstate. So that on the side of the road looks like a liability on the one hand, but on the other, they're easy to find. They have a residential pastor who's been there 23 years, the only church in the county, Black Church in the county, that has a residential pastor. He works out of the county. The only young people in the church are those within his family. The only church in the county to have a cemetery behind their church, and they are proud of it, and it is a beautiful place, and we have some photo in the center over there of one of the gravestones. Multiple times in this church, in the interviews that we conducted, almost every single one talked about this being a place of welcome, a place of care, a place of openness, regardless of who you are. When they were asked, what do you want others to know about you? You are welcome here. You will be cared for here. And that's one of the reasons that they tend the flame in that little Baptist church on the side of the road.
All right, so our second church that we visited and worshiped with and interviewed is called Calvary Temple Apostolic Church. It is in Newcastle, Kentucky, so it's a little bit south of Campbellsburg. Yeah, we kind of like just traveled on down that road, so we're just going a little bit further down. So this church is, well, it's really interesting. One of the things that makes it interesting is that it was founded in the 1950s and 60s as a Pentecostal Assembly of the World congregation. That is their Pentecostal denominational network tradition. And they are the most recently founded church that we studied. Their first pastor, more and more curious, her name was Sister Aldrich. Or at least that's her last name, obviously. Sister Aldrich was the first pastor. Her husband had a sister church down the road in Eminence, and so they had two Pentecostal Assemblies of the World churches going on at once. So she pastored this one, he pastored the other one. And when it was founded, this church was an all-white church. This is a Pentecostal, which is one of the reasons why it's, say not Kojic or not some, may be a Pentecostal tradition that I had never heard of before, and maybe it is new to you as well. So this church, when it was founded, it was all white. And so they tell a very interesting story. The story is of Sister Forey, her children, and the church. And this story becomes very, very important to this place. So, the story goes, as I have heard it from them, and will try to tell it on to you, is that this church was founded, and shortly after it was founded, a woman came to the church and wanted to worship there. And she was Sister Forey, and she was a black woman, and she had some children as well. I do not know if she had any other family living with her. But she came to this church and wanted to worship there, and that was against the law, quote unquote. The church isn't exactly sure if it was really against the law, but it was definitely a big no-no at the time, according to its current members. And so what the church did, though, is that they took her in, and what they would end up doing in these early years would be to have her come a little bit late, and then they would smuggle her out a little bit early, and then no one would know that they were an integrated church. Wow. They were a secret, integrated congregation. And this woman came, and she brought her children, and of course, over the years, it became less secret, and they became, but she was the sort of the black family in this church. And then A few years later, the church actually closed its doors. Sister Aldridge, they merged with Brother Aldridge's church down the way, and this one closed its doors. Then that merger, first, I don't know why, it didn't go so well, and so they decided they wanted to reopen back up Newcastle. In Newcastle, Calvary Temple always saw it, and what they did is that they decided to call Charles Forey, Sister Forey's son, who grew up in that church and was currently worshiping and assistant pastoring here in Louisville, at I think Greater Temple, I could look that up, Greater Bethel Temple. And they called him, and so he became the second pastor of the church. And so then it was a white church with a black pastor and his family.
Wow.
And that is how they reconstituted the church. So that over there on that side is sort of a picture of how it stood at one point in time. If you'll see, I don't know if you can see, it's over there on that wall as well, but here are white children, white families. Here I think might be the pastor's kid, African-American daughter, and then you see Charles Forey is behind the pulpit because he is the pastor. So the black man is behind the pulpit, surrounded by the white congregants. So they chose him, and the church developed. He eventually retired, but the church has stayed open ever since the Foreys reopened it, ever since the call to the Foreys. And so, all right, so what is Calvary Temple Apostolic like today? Well, today, these are the 5 persons that we worship with. This is the entire church, and they are all related to one another. And they don't live in Henry County. They live in Oldham County, so they drive about 20 minutes across the county line to come and worship together. On our day of worship, they're actually doing a worship Bible Sunday school combo. So we were there, we were in, like discussing the transition of David to Solomon, and like we were in it talking about pastoral transitions, and like there's 7 of us, you know, we including me. It was great. So after that was over, we sat down and we just said, how can we respectfully put this? Wonderful Calvary Temple. Why do you come here to worship every week? You know, of all the choices, you're a whole family. Why are you coming here? This feels, to me, it looks as an outside observer, a little out of the way. And so, how do you like tentatively, but they were very, very wonderful, and that is exactly the question they wanted to be asked. You can just say that like they were raring to go. So they, as a group, that's how we got the first story, and then we get the second story about how Pastor Doris fulfills the Forey family calling. Okay, so if you'll go back with me, Charles Forey was the pastor. He retired eventually, but before he retired, and probably before he started there, he married Pastor Doris, her aunt. So she has family connections to the Foreys, even though she is, her last name is not Forey. But she started worshiping there when her uncle was the pastor and stayed after he retired. The church was a little bit more integrated. And then they had a second pastor, and that pastor, due to an indiscretion that we were not that brave enough to ask the details yet, but there was indiscretion. About 10 years into his ministry, he split the church, apparently. And then when he came and resigned, he said, "Who's coming with me?" and split the church again. And I don't know where he is now. But anyway, so Calvary Temple Apostolic is left, and Pastor Doris just says, well, there was no one to get up and do worship. We were at Sunday worship when he did this. So I just got up and started leading worship. Somebody's got to get up and lead the worship. And so she had been like kind of training as an associate minister, but she hadn't gone to school. She had gone to seminary at that time. Anyway, so she pretty much became their interim pastor, minister person in terms of making sure the church was still open 3 days a week for 4 different services. Everything went on as scheduled. They had, pastors come in from the denomination. They were talked to their network. And so then after about a year of interim time, as they tell the story, the denomination comes in and says, okay, well now it's time to choose a real pastor. You can have these three choices. Brown, Jones, or Marshall. I don't actually know their names, but there are these three interim male preachers that were like, these men are looking for a church. Will you take one of them? Which one would you want? And then an older member of the congregation. At that point in time, the congregation, I think, was down to about 35 people. They were all older, maybe less means. The people with means sort of wandered off to greener churches, maybe with less troubles. And this man, who was a white congregant, they said, stood up and said, well, we have Doris. How about Doris? She's already here.
Wow.
And Doris, they talk about, she's like, that is not what I intended. That was not my plan. That was not it. But she said that was the family calling and that was the family covenant. The 4Es have always taken care of this church. And so I'm joining in on the family covenant. And so, so they are a living, active church. She's been the pastor there for almost 20 years. She herself is a retiree. And the members have continued dying off. It has been an integrated church until, say, the last couple of years, just due to deaths. But, the 4E family has continued to lead this church, and they really do see it as their collective calling to come and have the church doors open. Like, this is what they sacrifice and serve to do. So that's kind of the story. That's, to tell about Calvary Temple Apostolic today. So the third and final church that we looked at is on down the road a ways. This is the First Baptist Church of Eminence. Eminence is the largest city in the county. It is not the county seat. That would have been Newcastle up the road, but this one is a great deal larger and it's a lot closer to Shelbyville. So this church was founded in 1865. The pastor, Michael Duncan, says it was founded in 1865 Charles Duncan. We have a student, Michael Duncan. Charles Duncan and the Needmore Alley. There's a book, the Jubilee of Black Baptist book that was published in 1943, says it's 1866 in an abandoned stable by 3 pastors, Alex, Taylor, Mack, and Brown. Those both might be accurate. We really need to do more historical research on this church. I think this church has a lot going on. But I don't want to pry, they're both really good stories. Need more alley, I need more. Let's have a church. Abandoned stables, let's rebuild out of something that someone didn't like, didn't want anymore. They got good stories. Anyway. Now the big person to know in this is the Reverend W.H. Goatley Sr. He pastored this church from 1958 to 2003, and his name was spoken to me no less than 10 times. Everybody wanted to make sure I'd heard of him. So his legacy is still there, even though he himself is deceased. He is important. He became the pastor at 28. So he, became a pastor very young, ended up shepherding this church. He was involved in the civil rights movement, so he has stories of organizing, preparing, and helping bus people to Frankfurt to hear Martin Luther King Jr. speak. So this church does have a civil rights legacy within its walls. It has, and he also helped build this current building. This is not their original building, but during his tenure they built this building, and he designed all of the stained glass windows of the whole building. So those are, as well as being just a large figure in the congregation and in the local community. First Baptist of Eminence today. When we were there, we worshiped with 55 persons. There were about 55 persons present that Sunday. It was a really cold, icy Sunday, but it was also the Sunday before Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday holiday observed. It is the largest African American church of the county. It seems to have been the place that absorbed several members from other closed black churches across the county. There used to be more African American churches. But as populations moved and shifted and people have exited the county to find work, this seems to be the place. So I don't know how much of the legacy of Goatley is their legacy. I think that would be something to ask and follow up in, what the, bringing together of churches has done to this church's identity. And this church is a mix of community leaders and commuters. Pastor Duncan, he's the one in the robe on the wall, or he's right there. He and his wife, they live in Shelbyville. They're part of the commuters, and there are several. Some community leaders are commuters. This is Mary over here, and she's a big community leader, but commutes into Henry County to take care of the county, but grew up there. These people grew up in Henry County. Others are Henry County residents and also community leaders. This is Joe on the far left, Joe Wright. He's the one we've been talking about. We call that history connection. He has always lived in Henry County, but always worked outside the county to find a profession. Now he's retired, but he basically is one of the few that left to work and then will return. This is Jackie. She's, one of the unmarked, or titled heroes, I guess, or leaders of this church. She is a longtime member, grew up in this church. Because she's in some certain situations, she doesn't work full-time, but she does a lot of the volunteer and also paid bits of secretarial assistance. She also is the one that takes care of the community. If anybody's sick, even the former pastor, she was going to take care of them or make sure they got taken care of. She used to drive the buses to pick up children for, scripture. She is your sold out, sort of, just like her life is volunteering and caring for her community through as an extension of her devotion to God and, through this church. And so they want to be known, and I do think that they are still in the community because of their legacy. They want to be known. They talk about themselves as being a welcoming congregation, a community-oriented congregation, one that serves the community. It's unclear, we need to do more research to find out what exactly goes on day in and day out there, but this is who they want to be, and this is what they seem to be most appreciative of. Also the Goatley legacy. They really think that is something that their church has done for the community that is lasting. So they have a historical look towards what they mean in this relationship.
Oh, you have 5 minutes. Well, 5 minutes and then Q&A. So you have until 11.
All right, so a couple things here in closing, some observations that we made. Last year at this consultation, Angela opened with a question, what does rural mean? We haven't come back to that much this year, but this is an example, a definition, not an all-encompassing definition, but a definition of what a rural church looks like, an example. And so I want to keep that before you. One of the big observations that comes out for us is this idea of rethinking homebound. For a lot of us, homebound means somebody who's unable to leave his or her house because of maybe illness. But homebound can also mean people who are bound for home. And in each and every one of these churches, many, and some of them, most of the people who worship there week after week religiously, in the religious sense of the word, do not live near the church. They are home-bound members. And I think there's something there we might want to chew on, what it means to be a home church, the importance of that image. These churches are drawing people to them from far away places. Strong bonds, family bonds, lots of language about spiritual and biological realities here. Home is where the church is for them, but it's also where their house is. So they're kind of living in these poles of, I live somewhere else and my home church is here. And so they're challenging us, I think, to think deeply about what home means in our own context and how, as we resource these churches, help them think about that. The church may be in Henry County, but the house for many is in Shelby or Oldham or Jefferson County. One person drives from Fayette County. One person said to us, God's awesome because, I have people ask me, you drive all the way there to go to church? But that's where the Spirit leads me, he said. So the rural church is the draw in this case, not the one they're trying to get away from, which contradicts the idea that rural congregations in rural places can't draw people back. They're already drawing these people back. But there needs to be pre-established ties. They're not doing as much to randomly draw people back. There are already pre-established ties they are drawing. Loss of young people, it remains an issue for these congregations. Last year at the 29 Consultation, when Angel asked the panel, what's the main issue that you face? The fourth thing named was an aging congregation. And our denomination is not changing its expectations or its language in light of that fact. Some are moving away, not everybody's moving away. Okay. Second, recentering rural churches. These are churches sought out by people. They drive by other churches on the way to these churches. They're driving out to the valley. They don't just end up in the valley randomly. They go there on purpose. And the valley for them is a place of sustenance. It's a place of home. Black churches are at home in the valley. There's something to teach us about what it looks like to build a life at home in the valley. Like Wesley, this is a church on the move. Why do people come? Who comes? This is the paradox, the riddle that we've kind of looked at. A traveling church. The interesting thing here is this paradox and the riddle. I don't think our idea is we want to solve that riddle. But people who don't live there are coming back. But to lean into it, to live into it, and to have our denominations, our resources, our Bible studies, our news programs account for this paradox and riddle and enigma in these black churches. Lean into this moment. Don't try to solve necessarily this. Which raises interesting and difficult questions, we think, for being a ministerial leader in these situations. If most of your members don't live around the church, doing ministries around the church becomes more difficult. So how do you then lead people who live in Jefferson County to be active in the community that they don't live in? So that is a big hurdle that we need to be thinking about and resourcing ministers for. Joe Wright, whose name keeps coming up, lives in the county. But in that sense, he's not indicative. And finally, the ties that bind. Connections and cooperation, it's all over the place. You pull on a thread in Newcastle, Campbellsburg and First Baptist come tumbling out. And so cooperation between churches, among churches, family connections. Last year, Reverend Dr. Gray said, we pastor each other's cousins. And we found that. Family, pastoring together, pastoring your family members. There's a lot rolled up in ministering to and with your own family. And I think ministerial leaders in these churches could benefit from resources and thinking to help them navigate those waters. And finally, the example is Revival Road. What we call Revival Road. This 8-church revival that the Baptists do. It crosses the county line from Shelbyville all the way up to the interstate in Campbellsburg. And each year they get together and share and move around, again, that image of traveling church and do revival together. And I hear Dr. Gray does wonderful at those. So if we can pay better attention, listen more intently, then it's possible to renew our theology of rural places. A theology that's true to the lived lives of Campbellsburg and Newcastle and Inlands.
So, why do these churches exist here in this place and time? I think that is not a question. Again, I know that when we were sitting with Calvary Temple, it sounded like, are you sure you want to do this? But really, this is a kind of question that can be the open-handed, inviting. It's like, what is it? A lot of what we ask these persons, we generally ask them, what do you appreciate most about your church? And what would you like others to know about your church? That's as much as we got into the daily life. Like we just wanted to know those things, and they opened up and said lots and acted out more. And they acted and talked in theological ways about themselves when you just ask these two questions. And so one thing I talk a lot about, and I try to notice in this research, is that theology is lived and practiced as much as it is taught or preached. And so while I was there and worshiping and we were interviewing, I would listen to the words of the songs and what's going on, and the hymns and the liturgy and the sermons. And also I would be watching how people are doing fellowship time. How does this work? What's going on? What are they doing together? How are people talking to each other? What are the practices? How are they describing themselves? And I found a lot of different reasons why these people have a purpose for existing in this place and time. And so I just wanted to share you the long list, and we can talk about them. Some of these are things we've talked about before. They talk a lot about family care and relationships. They have a purpose for existing. This church is here because we have family care and we have relationships here, and those are important. We also welcome strangers. And at first I thought that just meant welcoming strangers. And then over time I realized they meant welcoming strangers. There are levels to that involve justice, dignity, humanity, equality, and also God's character at the very least. There's just theological levels. It's like there is community care and concern going on. They also really understand themselves as an avenue, a bridge, a conduit between persons and God. That is, when they talk about why we're here to worship, that is what I hear. As they're directing people about why we're here today, we got up this morning, aren't we glad God got us up this morning? Any language like that, all the way to the end. Why all of these churches have sort of an altar call experience. That would be, come, we're here, prayer, baptism, whatever. Whatever it is that healing, all of that is about being the conduit between the divine and persons. And they really take that seriously. That is something to be remembered. And all of that is also, all of those are wrapped up into testimony to God's character and the sign of universal human dignity and worth. So we're going to stop and let you all ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions about this presentation, or if you'd like to ask some questions about the photography, I'd be happy to do that as well.